Let's see, where are we? Okay, hey, this is nice. Wait, what's that over there? Oh! Hey, I'm Andre. I make games and I try to help people make theirs. And I'm making a horror game where you have to face off against the evil versions of these. So today I'll be trying to put them in my game about the Pope purging the Vatican from demons. And like the title says, the plan is to make fully biblically accurate designs that'll really put the fear of hell in you. But there are a lot of problems with trying to do this, and in fact, it'll be the single most challenging feature I've ever implemented in any of my games. Here's why. So I've done a lot of research into angels, and you've probably heard of cherubim and seraphim, but there are actually 9 different kinds of angels referenced in the Bible. From Colossians, all things created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominations or principalities or powers, and these may not sound like angel names, but that's exactly how ancient Christians understood this.
Angeli dominatione potestates.
So why does any of this even matter? Well, for one, I can't actually create 9 different enemies. That would be insane. So I'll have to figure out what kinds of enemies I will need in the game and which type of angel category would fit that role. The good news is I actually did spend a lot of time planning my game's design, which included what sorts of challenges different enemies should pose to the player, which narrows it down to only 5 enemy types. But the bad news is that I'm still going to have to model, animate, and program all of them. And to top it all off, even after all that work, it's very possible that the enemies will still just turn out horrible. But I had to start somewhere, and the most logical place to start would be the bottom rank of angels, which are called, well, angels. But the truth is, no matter where you start, enemies are one of the most difficult features to implement in games, so I had to make this process as easy for myself as possible. I went back into an old project and picked out an enemy that I never ended up using. Obviously, not everyone will just have one of these lying around, but it's basically just a modified Unity asset. I gave him a cell shader, experimented with a glowing effect, and added 2 spooky red glowing eyes. It's a good start, but it's still nowhere near as impressive as those more intense looking biblical angels. So what's up with that? Well, if you break down the angelic hierarchy, only the top 3 look like anything other than just human. As this the guy that we're working on right now is just a regular angel, he'd probably just look like an ordinary person. Except because he's a fallen angel, he might look a little bit more like what a lot of the saints describe the souls of the damned to look like. They were like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, having human forms. This vision from Fatima also says that the demons had a terrifying and repellent likeness to frightful and unknown animals. We'll get back to this later, but I think for now it makes sense that the lowest ranks of demons will still just look like the souls of damned people. Also, since it ended up being pretty easy to do, I added fallen archangels, which would be a lot tougher to take down than normal enemies, and fallen virtues, which I'm calling vices, and they'll be way faster. Fallen powers would be much tougher and bigger, and the idea with them is that you won't be able to defeat them the normal way. You'll have to get creative and find a different way to get rid of them. Before continuing on to the higher ranked angels, I did want to quickly ask something of you guys, which is that if you've ever enjoyed any of my videos, they do take a lot of work to make, and I'd really appreciate it if you checked out my Patreon. You'll get access to great exclusive game dev content, exercises, info, and exclusive Discord access. Back to the video. So what about the fallen versions of other kinds of angels? Well, that's where I think this animalistic description comes in, because it looks like angels retain their categories even when they fall. Since St. Paul does say, our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but of principalities and powers, against the spirits of wickedness in the high places. So if that's true for powers and principalities, it could easily apply to thrones, seraphim, and cherubim as well. And actually, I already got started with the fallen versions of thrones, which I'm calling the dethroned. As angels, they would have surrounded the throne of God, and I think the reason they have so many eyes is because seeing God is synonymous with the reward of heaven. So the idea behind these dethroned is that they refuse to look. Their wheels are all bent out of shape because they fail to serve their purpose. And instead of observing the glory of God, they just constantly scream and rage. So that takes care of most of the enemies, but what about those animalistic looking ones? Well, if we look at the descriptions of cherubim, we can see that they have 4 different kinds of heads, 3 of which are of different animals. And some people think that the word seraph is directly related to a word meaning either burning one or poisonous snake. A snake doesn't really make sense to me for an angel, but if you think about it, a flying poisonous snake that has fire sounds an awful lot like a dragon, right? And dragons in the Bible represent the devil. But get this, the devil was actually the highest ranking angel, which means he must have been none other than a fallen seraph, which gives me an idea. So I had this super simple mock-up ready for what I originally wanted the Fallen Seraph to look like, and it was partially inspired by that old Halo 5 trailer, but what I think I'll do instead is really lean into that Cobra-like image. I don't want to make it a generic dragon, I want to focus in on these 4 design points. It should have some verticality to it, because that would be more imposing than if it was like crawling around or something. It should be snake-like in some way, it should involve some sort of fire, but probably more smoky and like snuffed like a Balrog. And finally, it should have 3 wings. Now, Seraphim are described as covering their faces and their feet with 2 sets of their wings. The thing is, this is more of a gesture of humility, so I think that the evil version would always have its wings outstretched in more of a prideful gesture. I wanted to make most of the skeleton that I already had in place and somehow add a snake-like body, but I realized that it would just take me way too long to try to model something that didn't look terrible. For this to work and be truly menacing, I had to approach it a different way. Okay, so maybe the snake-like appearance is more metaphorical. Maybe instead we focus on the other design elements like the smoky fire. And maybe, for the snake element, we can use the same basic game dev principle I've been using this whole entire time, which is reuse. So instead of trying to model a detailed snake head, I'm going to reuse the mouth that I used for the dethroned, and the way that this thing looks with the post-processing and the particle effects. Despite all the challenges, I'm really happy with the way these turned out so far. And if you're interested in this game as well, you can sign up right now for the first ever demo down in the description. I'm really happy to be able to connect my games with my faith, doing what I love and filling it with what I believe. And I wouldn't have thought this to be possible a few years ago. If you're looking to create your own game, you've probably run into tons of challenges already, but you shouldn't be giving up. And if you want to get started with game development as smoothly as possible, with as little mistakes as possible, I highly recommend you start with this video right here, which will give you a great starting point for your own game dev journey. Thanks so much for watching, and God bless.